Hey guys, so today we have World War II Part 3. We are almost done with this unit. I think this is day 6 of Ed Puzzle Notes. This is, I know it's a huge unit, but we're almost done. The test review guide is already up in Google Classroom, so hopefully you see that. We have one more Ed Puzzle, and that will be World War II, the home front. Today we're going to focus on the Pacific. And remember, our previous Ed Puzzle was about the European theater all the way through the death of Hitler, and then, of course, VE Day. So now we are going to focus on the Pacific side of the war. Okay, so here we go. Please make sure you take some good notes and all that good stuff, and we'll have a lot to talk about on our next live day. Okay, so war in the Pacific. Remember, it starts, in with the invasion of China, really by Japan back in the 1930s. But we, America, we don't get pulled in until December 7th of 41 with the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Okay, so after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States is going to send military troops to fight in the Pacific, including my grandfather, my dad's dad, left this small mountain town of Southern Virginia, went through the Panama Canal, and then was sent out to the Pacific as a 17-year-old kid. It just fascinates me what that generation of Americans did. But anyway, so let's go ahead and keep moving on. Now, in the Pacific, we're going to see a new kind of warfare. Oftentimes, when we're looking at things in the 20th century, they are new and innovative styles of doing things, whether it's World War I and trench warfare. And here in the Pacific, it's going to be aircraft carriers. It's going to be air and sea battles, which are somewhat new. You have these kind of floating cities, if you want to call them that, with these aircraft carriers, which become the most vital part of the navies of really both sides. We're going to talk about one specific battle where this played a big role when we get into this a little bit. Okay, and there, of course, is an aircraft carrier. Um, in the turning point battle, we're going to jump right into the turning point. It is the Battle of Midway. So if you see on this map right here, here is Midway. Midway between Asia and the United States or North America. It is the turning point because this is the furthest that the Japanese ever get to, okay? Before America wins and then systematically starts to drive them back towards the main island of Japan. Okay. Um, Now, remember in the last Ed puzzle, we talked about the fact that the naval code was broken. The Battle of Midway is really the impact of that code breaking because America knew where the Japanese were going to be and what they were going to do, and had the ability to really have a significant win at the Battle of Midway. Speaking of aircraft carriers, at this battle, 4 Japanese aircraft carriers were destroyed by the United States. And so this is a pivotal turning point in the history of the Pacific Theater. Okay, now, from this point forward, from the Battle of Midway in 1942, all the way until the dropping of the atomic bombs in 1945, the United States is going to be playing an offensive warfare model. Okay, they are going to be pushing the entire time, but they're going to be pushing with a new style strategy as well. Okay, now, as we've already discussed in one of the previous Ed puzzles, the Japanese, they do not play by traditional European style rules of war. Okay. They have, the code of the samurai that we talked about, showing no cowardice, no surrender. And one of the impacts of this, or one of the strategies that's used by the Japanese, is basically suicide bombing. And it was called kamikaze. And so here you see kamikaze pilots. Their sole purpose was to fly their planes into U.S. ships. Um, and to the point where as the war raged on, these pilots quite literally, this was their job to do. They were given pictures of their targets and they were meant to run into them in order to maximize the damage. And they weren't given enough fuel to return back. This was what they were supposed to do. Okay, so it is definitely not traditional warfare, and this is going to play a major role moving forward in this war as well. Okay, now island hopping. This is the strategy that I was talking about. Given the fact that the Japanese would defend until the death anywhere and everywhere that they are, the United States cannot get bogged down trying to reclaim or reconquer or retake every single one of these Pacific islands, because there are hundreds of islands that are now covered with the Japanese Empire. Okay. And so, what island hopping does, the strategy is to strategically skip the heavily fortified and defended islands and only seize islands in order to get closer to the main Japanese islands. It was a foregone conclusion that America was going to have to invade and conquer the main islands of Japan in order to win this war. Of course, that doesn't happen, and we'll get to that in a couple of slides, but that was the main mentality going in. That's what we thought, what America thought was going to have to happen. So, island hopping is the strategy in which to get there. And so, here you can see here's the Battle of Midway, and then from then on forward, we are going to bypass some of these more heavily defended islands in the South Pacific. We are going to reclaim the Philippine Islands in some extremely brutal and high casualty warfare. But the end game is to get to Japan. And the two most significant islands that were won by the Americans in that quest to Japan is, of course, Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and we're going to talk about both of those here in a minute. Okay, there of course is a battleship, um, and then fighting on Iwo Jima, and this is of course one of those very famous photographs of raising the American flag atop um, Iwo Jima, where everybody could see it, even though the battle was not won yet for another few weeks. It was a morale booster. Okay, and here is Iwo Jima right there. Okay, so from 43 to 45, the Allies are going to take back the Philippines and they're going to move within striking distance of the main islands here, including Tokyo, of Japan. Okay, so firebombing. So here's the deal. I can't remember if there's a map on the next slide, so I want to come back here. Keep this in mind. We've got Iwo Jima and Okinawa right here. Okay, this is where the firebombing is going to take off from. Okay, oh, good, it is here. All right, so in 1945, the Allies are going to claim these two pivotal islands. And from these islands, they are now within striking distance of Japan. They have the ability to send their enormous flying fortress B 29 bombers to drop these hundreds of tons of munition of bombs over Japan, specifically Tokyo. Okay, so from these islands, they begin to firebomb. The bombs that were used were very close to what napalm would be like in Vietnam. We're going to talk about napalm. They were incendiary. It was meant to catch fire. It was meant to create enormous fires. And here, of course, is a photograph of the flying fortresses dropping just dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of bombs. It's fascinating to see this. It would be terrifying to witness it, though. Okay, and here is Tokyo, a aerial view of Tokyo looking down at nighttime. This is the city on fire. Um, Here is the aftermath. You can see the charred bodies of the civilians um, in Tokyo. You're going to have just thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of civilian casualties throughout the firebombing of Tokyo. Um, but Japan is going to refuse to surrender. It becomes very clear that America is going to have to be in this for the long haul, and there's going to be casualty rates in the millions with the invasion of Tokyo because the Japanese culture, they are not going to surrender. They are going to fight till the death. And so this is going to be a long, drawn out, high casualty event. Okay, by May of 1945, the United States is going to begin preparing for a land invasion of Japan, and this would cost the lives of millions. Okay, however, we have this little thing called the Manhattan Project that's going on. Okay, and so the Manhattan Project um, is basically a secret project to build nuclear weapons. Okay, in 1939, so this is before we were in the war, Albert Einstein, right here, we all know who Albert Einstein is. He is going to write a letter to President Roosevelt right here, and he is going to tell the president about the potentiality of building a nuclear weapon. And with that, the Manhattan Project is born. Okay, a top secret program called the Manhattan Project. Now, America is not the only one that's in the middle of trying to build something like this. Nazi Germany was also trying to build atomic warfare. Luckily for mankind, it did not happen. Um, but of course, the United States does have the ability to be successful with this. Okay. So Robert Oppenheimer, right here, he is a theoretical physicist, um, and he is going to be put in charge of developing the bomb. It is done in secret in various parts of the nation. It's really, not to sound like a nerd, but it's really cool the way that it was put together. Okay. And so here's the construction of the bomb. To keep it secret from everybody that's actually working on it, except those at the very top, um, it's done in separate parts of the country. So the headquarters of the Manhattan Project is, of course, going to be in D.C. Okay. The laboratory where Enrico Fermi is developing the nuclear reaction is going to actually be in Chicago at the University of Chicago. Then in Hanford, Washington, you're going to have the development of plutonium, okay, for especially the second bomb that's dropped on Nagasaki is going to be a plutonium. The first bomb is uranium, okay. So the bomb is going to be constructed in a secret city in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, okay. In Oak Ridge, it is completely secret. In fact, I don't know if any of you had Mr. Smith for biology, um, but I think it's his great grandparents that, he's from Oak Ridge, and his great grandparents actually worked on the Manhattan Project. It's really fascinating. So if you ever see Mr. Smith, ask him about it because it's pretty cool. Um, but anyway, so then it's going to be constructed, okay, in Oak Ridge. It's going to be brought to New Mexico, and then it's going to be taken to the Trinity site to actually be detonated, okay. And there it is, the test bomb, and it is tested successfully, and the nuclear weaponry is now ready for use by the United States of America. Okay, so that's just a quick crash course, I guess, on the Manhattan Project. But long story short, America, just in time in 1945, has a ready to go, all clear for the Manhattan Project. Okay, so back to the war. Um, Roosevelt's going to die in April of 1945 of natural causes. Remember, he's a very sickly man. He has a stroke while undergoing therapy in Warm Springs, Georgia. And Harry Truman, vice president, is going to become president of the United States. And this is another aside. And I'm sorry if this ed puzzle is going to take a little bit longer, but I just can't not tell some of these things. Um, Truman, speaking of the Manhattan Project, it is so incredibly secret that when FDR wins his fourth term, right, in 1944, um, his new vice president, Harry Truman, doesn't even know that it happens, doesn't even know the Manhattan Project exists. The vice president of the United States of America doesn't know about the Manhattan Project. That's how secret this was. Okay, so when he becomes president, when he's sworn in, they then have to tell him that America is developing this weapon of mass destruction, and he's shocked by it. But he's going to be the one that's going to have to make the decision as to whether or not they're going to use it. Okay, so the Potsdam Declaration. Let's get to the Potsdam Conference. Okay, in July of 1945, the new big three meet. So FDR's gone, but so now you have Churchill, Stalin, and now the newcomer, President Truman. Okay, and it's at this conference where Truman is told of the successful testing of the atomic bomb, and is told that it is ready to go if he gives the order. Okay. And of course, in a very early Cold War move, he's not going to tell anybody, especially Joseph Stalin. He's not going to let him know what's going on. And, it's at Potsdam where he is going to warn um, Japan that if they do not surrender, they would face, quote, prompt and utter destruction. Of course, nobody on Earth knows what he's talking about. They just think he's bluffing, like normal. Just saying that you better surrender. They had no idea that the atomic bomb was going to happen. He was not bluffing. He's not lying. Okay, but nonetheless, he makes this declaration. Japan does not capitulate, and so the rest, as they say, is history. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into the bombings and then VJ Day, Victory in Japan Day. Okay, so they refuse to surrender. Truman orders the bombing of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. It is chosen for a reason. Both Hiroshima and Nagasaki are both chosen because they had not been targeted by any bombings as of yet. And they wanted to, this is going to sound so callous, but America didn't know what these bombs were going to do. And so they wanted to drop it over a clean surface so that they could see the extent of the damage from this one bomb. And so Hiroshima is going to be the test city. And that sounds horrible. Okay. And so you have the Enola Gay that is going to drop the first bomb. And there it is. And the first bomb, this is some of the statistics of it. The temperature at the ground under the bomb. That's the other thing about the atomic bomb is it does not detonate on impact. It detonates over the target of 100 feet or so above the ground, so that the blast radius is more intense and goes further, and it blasts down as well. So the temperature right under the blast is 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Um, the hurricane force winds 980 miles an hour. You're going to have 70,000 people killed immediately, 140,000 people killed by the end of 1945, and then total deaths related to this one bomb is 200,000 people. And the large majority of these people are just civilians. Okay. And here are some of the aftermath photographs of what the landscape looks like in Hiroshima after the bomb detonation. Okay. So usually you would think that this would spell the end of the war, but Japan refuses to surrender. And so after 3 days and no surrender, America drops a second bomb on Nagasaki. Okay. And there is the second bomb. Remember, this one is the plutonium one. It's actually stronger than the first one. Okay. And there's a photograph of it actually exploding, and then the aftermath at Nagasaki. Okay. And, the ethics of whether or not this was justified is a debate that is unwinnable, because it is horrendous, it's heinous, it's horrifying, what America did. However, by making the decision to drop the bombs, it potentially, and not really potentially, it definitely saved millions of both Japanese and American lives. So this is a tough decision. Okay. Now, nonetheless, after the second atomic bomb, the Emperor Hirohito is going to agree to surrender. But this, unlike Germany, this is not an unconditional surrender. This is actually a conditional surrender. Because of the culture of the Japanese, America allowed the emperor to retain his role as emperor, Hirohito. Okay. So the official surrender is on September 2nd, 1945, on top of the deck of the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. In fact, my grandfather, he wasn't on the USS Missouri, but he was in Tokyo Bay during the surrender, which I think is just fascinating. He was on the Arlington. But anyways, so here is the delegation from the Empire of Japan. Here's the United States. There is General MacArthur, who's going to speak for the Americans at the surrender. He's going to sign the papers for Truman, and then he's actually going to stay. We're going to talk about this a little bit in the next puzzle, but he's going to stay in Tokyo as the military governor and help rebuild Japan. And in fact, you know, in a very stark difference to the treatment of Germany in World War One by France and Britain, America is going to be kind to both Germany and Japan following this war and cultivate a relationship that we still have today. Japan is our number one military and really economic ally in the Pacific, in Asia, even today in 2021. And a lot of that comes out of the relationship that was cultivated directly following the dropping of two nuclear weapons on their country. Okay, but nonetheless, the war is over. VJ Day, the moment to celebrate, but we have to celebrate while also thinking about the horrifying event that everybody, the world, just lived through. Okay, so World War II is the biggest, deadliest, most impactful, horrifying war in the history of the world. Okay. We have an estimated 70 to 85 million humans were killed during this war. That is unbelievable. It is astronomical. Okay. Um, the deaths directly caused by the war are an estimated 50 to 56 million. Additional 19 to 28 million from war related disease and famine, and a lot of that's going to come from the Soviet Union. Here you can see, if you look closely, the military deaths, the total death, the civilian deaths. You can see the Soviet Union up here. The blue is the percentage of the 1939 population of each of these nations that was killed as a result of the war. But it is just unbelievable. Okay, the consequences, the damage of this war, and collateral damage. Even though this was a total war and civilians were not necessarily not targets, I still want to call civilians collateral damage, and the collateral damage here is unbelievable with the civilian casualties that we see here. Okay. So, Europe is devastated by the war. It loses its place as the epicenter of power in the world. We're going to see two new superpowers emerge, the Soviet Union and the United States. And this is what's going to usher in the Cold War that we're going to talk about in the next unit. Competing for nuclear power, competing for influence with their government ideology around the world, competing in space technology, competing in just about everything for the next, oh man, 40, 45 years. And you could argue, even still today, there is a huge rivalry between the United States and Russia. Even though it is no longer the Soviet Union, there's still immense rivalry between the two. Okay. And then, of course, the United Nations is formed. And remember, the United Nations was agreed to through the Yalta Conference as one of the stipulations, one of the things that was put in place. And it replaces the League of Nations in order to promote peace. And the United Nations is going to get busy pretty quickly. And of course, we'll talk about that in the next unit as well. All right, guys. I really hope that wasn't too long. I feel like it may have been, and I'm sorry for that. But I hope you have a wonderful day. Hope you learned some stuff. Hope you jotted down some questions that we can talk about. But I will talk to you later. All right, see you.